When the Arab Spring began properly blossoming 2 years ago, outside opinion was divided into two camps. Optimists thought we were witnessing the beginnings of an extension of human freedom and liberal democracy that could rival the liberation of Eastern Europe in the early 90s. Pessimists, who tended to be people who'd spent time in the Middle East, worried that the optimists were underestimating the Middle East's eternal capacity for getting even worse than it presently happens to be.
In the last 2 years, there's been no shortage of evidence that the Jeremiahs might have been right. But today's assassination of Tunisian politician Chokri Belaid feels especially significant. A resolutely secular politician, Belaid was the sort of person who might have hoped to flourish in a free Middle East. His death amid post-Arab Spring elections, which have benefited Islamists at the expense of his kind, is sufficient to prompt the question of whether the Middle East will accept secular government except at gunpoint. Well, joining us now from Paris to help us answer this is French-Algerian journalist Nabila Ramdani. Hello, Nabila.
Hello, good evening.
First of all, what is the latest you're hearing from Tunis?
Well, we're hearing that, of course, there's an escalation of violence prompted by what is essentially the first political assassination in Tunisia in the aftermath of the Arab Spring, and indeed of the first free elections in the post-Ben Ali era back in October 2011. So there's a deep sense of shock, and it led to thousands of people taking to the streets and led to an expression of anger and also violence, and clashes have erupted between demonstrators and indeed police forces. Some people are injured. One police officer has been reported dead as well. And there is more demonstrations planned for Friday, which is likely to attract more than 4,000 people to take to the streets and demonstrate further anger at what is essentially being seen as utterly unacceptable by the vast majority of people.
What's the latest you're hearing about the dissolution of the government?
Well, I think this political assassination has to be set in a very unstable political context, and you're quite right to highlight this point. It has taken place in the context of infighting over the drafting of a new constitution and a deep political deadlock. And that's precisely why we've heard the Prime Minister announce today new elections to try to overcome this deadlock. And on the face of it, it has to be said that promises of new elections also signifies that the democratic process continues and that the country will not be held back by evil deeds like the murder of a political leader, effectively, to essentially bring a halt to democratic principles in the country. So the vast majority of Tunisians would are very much trying to overcome these political difficulties. And it has to be highlighted that the party which is dominating the political life in Tunisia, Ennahda party, which is a moderate Islamist party, although it came to power with a vast majority of votes, it is struggling at the moment, and it actually fell in the polls recently dramatically, and Chokri Belaid was actually seen as a rising star in the political circle, attracting more and more votes from essentially seculars, but also people who were quite worried about the way Islamist political figures were leading the country.
What are thoughts on who was behind the killing of Chokri Belaid, and what motive?
Well, we've heard statements coming from the family of Chokri Belaid. He was, of course, a prominent figure in the opposition. He was a secular political figure, and he had opposed Islamist parties for a very long time, even starting his militancy back in the days of Ben Ali when he was exiled in France, and he has always been a figure on the left. And declarations today by family members point to the fact that he has been brutally assassinated. In fact, he was shot dead 3 times, and by three men in a black vehicle, as they were described, and he later died in hospital. Some news channels or media organizations have also reported that Mr. Belaid had reportedly received recent death threats, and that he himself had indicated on Saturday that he accused himself mercenaries hired by the ruling party in Nahda of carrying out attacks on Democratic Patriots meetings, a party which he leads himself.
Nabila, I wanted to widen the discussion out a little bit to, I guess, discuss the current general state of the Middle East. Why, 2 years after the Arab Spring, is it still impossible to imagine a secular figure, someone like Chokri Belaid, who wanted to keep God out of government, actually getting elected to the leadership of a Middle Eastern country?
Well, I think perhaps the danger here is to oppose secularists and against Islamists in almost a black and white manner. And of course, the murder of Chokri Belaid is a blow to democracy in Tunisia, and especially since only a little more than 2 years after the fall of Ben Ali, who was the first tyrant to be toppled in the Arab Spring. But I think beyond the human tragedy, there's indeed a danger that the entire spirit of the Arab Spring could be threatened. But it has to be highlighted as well that the whole point of the Arab Spring was about democracy and reconciling differences of opinion. And so I think that, this idea that there is a fundamentalist straitjacket preventing the Arab world from electing a secular politician is a bit far-fetched. And if you speak to devout Muslims, they would agree that there is room for secular politicians, of course, who do not base their policies on their faith. But I think, more crucially, one of the major point of the Arab Spring was not to create, utopia or quick fix solutions. The post-Arab Spring countries were always going to experience chaotic transitions. But the Arab Spring was first and foremost about articulating the massive problems holding back the Arab world and putting them on a global agenda. And it emerges as exemplified by this assassination that one of its endemic problems is, in fact, political violence. And the outrage which people are expressing in Tunisia at the moment illustrates how unacceptable the situation is for the vast majority of Tunisians.
Tunisia doesn't really have a history of political assassinations like this. What is the hope for, secular people to fill the shoes and rise up and be an effective opposition?
Well, you're right. That kind of political assassination is actually very rare in Tunisia. And the anger expressed by the Tunisians today also shows that the country is not giving up on democracy and is not going to tolerate this kind of, brutal elimination of anybody who perhaps disagrees with the ruling party. And I think one of the greatest signs that democracy continues to flourish following this tragedy is the very fact that more demonstrations will take place and people are determined to carry on protesting. In fact, there's a general strike which will take place on Friday. Another vibrant sign of the democratic process continuing is the call for new elections. So I think in your introductory segment you were opposing the optimists to the pessimists. I would be rather cautiously optimistic about the situation in Tunisia.
And we can only hope that you are right. Nabila Ramdani, thank you as ever for joining us. You're listening to The Daily on Monocle 24.